I came early, so
There are people online, speakers in the ceilings, cameras are around. You won't even know when you'll be on camera.
Whatever you'd like. So that's the round. If you're not going to use this, actually, I won't move it. I'll leave it just as an option.
Just in case. Do you have my other one?
Oh,
Do you have my other one? Yeah.
Valentina, can I grab one of those?
Umar Hatima Tova, how is everybody? Hungry? Okay. Thanks.
Do you want? I pull it.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
So Gemar Chatima Tova to everyone. Glad to see you all here, so many of you. And thank you for spending your Chavim, your holidays with Beth Israel. You know, there's a lot that comes into a year of writing. You know, I write all the time, but when I think about High Holy Days, I think about something that people are going to carry for them for their year, and think and how they're going to respond to it, and what they're going to respond to, and what connects. And so, I don't know how we're going to do this. We're going to see how it goes. You know, every year is different, but I just preface this by saying this year. I had two completely different rhythms of thinking. One was about Israel and what was going on in the democracy of Israel. I needed to address that because I think it's imperative that if you're a leader in the Jewish community, that you should be speaking up. So that was my mandate, self-imposed mandate. Nobody pushed me to it. Nobody forced me to it. I saw some people writing about, oh, the rabbi was tasked to talk about it. No, I wasn't tasked to talk about anything. It's about freedom in the pulpit. So I say what I want, and you listen. And
we talk
I'm gonna be honest, right? And you want to agree, disagree, we can go at it, no problem. But it's called freedom of the pulpit. So we have the opportunity to talk. I'm not going to speak about things that I don't feel are relevant. So the two topics that I focus on this year, for me, were very relevant. Israel, I think, is relevant for us as a community, and we can get into that context. And I also think that on Yom Kippur, I'm not going to talk about things that are about outside of our personal introspective element. It's just not going to happen, because I believe that Yom Kippur is a time that's reserved for things that have to do with the self. And if we have all year to discuss all the things that are going on in society, why are we then taking the time to, on Kol Nidre, when we're supposed to be internal, talking about the other? And that, for me, Rosh Hashanah feels much more of a balanced time to do that. I don't feel like that on Yom Kippur. So just to let you know where my head is at, when I'm thinking about Yom Kippur or Kol Nidre, I'm thinking about what are things that are personal? What are things that are going on in the lives of the community that I get to hold and have the privilege of holding? That, to me, this year was about vulnerability, because there is so much of it and so intense. And I felt that was a really important opportunity. So this is really your session. So I want it to be a session where you can offer thoughts, feedback, you can agree, you can disagree, we can wrestle, we can debate, That's what this time is about. It'll keep your minds moving outside of your stomach, and it'll keep you in a way of thinking. So I know people already told me they were coming because they had some thoughts and they wanted to share them. So I don't feel shy to share. I want you to feel the opportunity to share. So I want to open up. It doesn't matter which one you want to discuss. We'll figure out. We'll go along the line. We'll just see where life takes us. Does that sound okay? All right. Who'd like to go first? Go ahead. Can you share your name so everybody can know who you are?
I'm David.
Hi, David.
Hi. What is working in Israel right now?
What is working in Israel right now? Okay, so it's actually a very good question, and I have a lot to answer. I have a lot of response to it. First of all, when there is any kind of natural disaster in the world, Israel is the first to respond. I want to be very clear. Not only the government, but NGOs, non-governmental organizations like Israel, organizations that hold the idea of what Israel stands for and puts it out in the rest of the world. Humanitarian efforts have nothing to do with politics whatsoever. I think that in Israel, we see the idea of ingenuity at its height. If you've heard the term managing up, it was invented in Israel. Why? Because people like to yell at their commanders in the IDF. Anybody in the IDF? Anybody who served in the IDF that's here? Okay. So part of that's very different. Oh, yes. Can you tell us anything you wanted to, anything you can, or would like to say a little about your experience in the IDF and what maybe how that shaped you?
Maybe just before this, what is working in Israel? I'm coming from a water field.
Go ahead. I want everybody to hear you.
Hey, I'm Tomer. I'm a water engineer. Working here in California for 3 years.
And is going to be teaching with us.
Anyway, when it comes to clean tech and agriculture and water technology, I think we are quite advanced in the world. And I saw a good chunk of it. And sorry, the question about the IDF in terms of leadership. Yeah, I think it's something I only learned like retrospectively, like after maybe 10 to 12 years of how really it's structured to, you go to the organization and grow into it and becomes leader, managing up, like you said. It's really something component. Sorry, I lost my English.
Confident, or becomes something, confidence.
Yeah, like
right.
more like inherent in who you are. Person.
Beautiful. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think, thank you, Tomer. And Tomer's going to be teaching Hebrew conversational class for us. And there will be more news to come. Oh, I like that. Yeah, very excited. Tomer will be teaching. So those are just a few. But I would say that even though I'm discussing the politics of Israel and what's going on in terms of democracy, in essence, what we're seeing right now on the streets of Israel, there are hundreds of thousands in their 38th week. Understand, that would be the equivalent to the Women's March in DC happening every week for almost a year. If you can imagine what that's like, to have a country where people have been as removed from government as possible, all of a sudden becoming involved because they feel that their foundational understanding of who they are as a country is at risk. And so they're taking to the streets. Their Motzei Shabbat, their Saturday evenings, are not about going out with friends and loved ones. They're about what shirt can they be wearing and what music can they be listening to as they're walking to a demonstration. I can tell you I was in the demonstrations when I was in Israel in May, and took part in the ones that are here in San Diego, and they're powerful. But they are representing what is actually beautiful about Israel, which is democracy at its core right now. And the fact that Israel, from this tiny nation state 75 years ago, has become the 8th largest superpower in the world in 75 years. There is nothing other than miraculous about that. And that for me is why I feel so passionate about bringing it to the forefront of speaking about it on the pulpit. A lot of people saying, you're courageous, Rabbi, for speaking about it. Well, I'm not courageous, I'm a person who believes in something. So I believe any one of us who has something that they want, that they have passion about, should be speaking about it. Because I believe if you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. I've always believed that. So for me, that is key. It's non-negotiable. So, it's part of why I feel like we can make decisions in this congregation at this point, like where we're going, how we're doing, what we're doing, because we have leadership, we have a wonderful, fantastic board, we have amazing staff, and we have phenomenal clergy that are really working hard to make decisions that we know are about the best interests of here, because it's not an autocracy, it's a democracy. We're trying to hear you. We're not perfect, we are perfectly imperfect. But I believe that we stand for something, and because we stand for something, it may push a few people away. That's okay. I always say, if you come here and it's not a shidduch, it's not a shidduch. You can't force a shidduch. It's gotta work. That's why divorce is acceptable in Jewish life. It's not only about marriage. It can be about shuls as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. That's okay. We're not for everyone, and as long as we recognize that. And I think Israel is not going to be for everybody. Just back to your question, I don't think Israel is for everybody. I think that Israel represents, I feel, the best we could possibly be, and the fact that we look at Israel as this, if you look at the alt-right or ultra-left boards and discussions, you'll see that Israel is a white colonialist state. Well, it's interesting that 44% of Israel is non-white. 44% in the way we identify race here. I'm going to be very clear. That's not how we identify, historically, that's not how we identify race, but that is how we identify race here. 44% of Israel is non-white, and 20% of Israel is Muslim. And we have Druze, and we have other cultures, and we have many Christians, and we have many different nationalities and ethnicities that make up this beautiful state of almost 10 million people. So that, for me, is what I believe is going right. There's a lot of things that are going wrong. I'm not sugarcoating it, but I believe that at the core, it's why I'll keep bringing people back there again and again and again, because there is such amazingness that we can go there with, and we can still question and wrestle, and that's okay. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Irv, and as I look around this room, I see there are many people who will have the same memory I have of Yom Kippur 50 years ago, when Israel faced its greatest external threat in its history. And your two talks, Rabbi, about Israel, now it's an internal threat, and about vulnerability, give me some encouragement, because I remember what we all felt like 50 years ago on Yom Kippur. It was scary, and it's scary now, not just Israel, but some of the things happening in the rest of the world. So thank you for taking those two themes, and even if you didn't intend to connect them, they connected for me.
No, I appreciate it. Irv, as you're talking, I'm like, interesting connection. I see, cognitively, I see how they connect. But the emotion that you just put it out there with is very powerful. And Irv and Jan were with me in Israel in October, and they know, they got to see diversity. They got to see the culture and the beauty of the land, and I think that's very powerful. Go ahead, I saw hands up, some hands up. Go ahead.
I'm Charlie.
Hi, Charlie.
I was just you gave me an additional thought, or vulnerability, which you spoke so much about, and I'm not sure that you touched on this, but it has an incredible strength to it, because when one exhibits vulnerability, one invites connection and communication in a way that you really can't achieve otherwise. And I wonder if there isn't something that will end up with a gain in the moral high ground that Israel, a place that Israel occupied so long and seems to have threatened now. But through this genesis and these struggles, maybe it'll all, I don't know, I'm kind of an optimist.
It's very possible. I believe it. There was the part that I did connect, or I was just gonna say, and Charlie, what you're saying, the part that I did connect was I talked a little about the Jewish people and our ancestral PTSD, right? I did say that, and I firmly believe that our ancestral PTSD helps us as Jewish people become more resilient than perhaps those next to us. Because there is something deep and real in the contours of how we've lived. And even if we are living in the bastion of privilege in America, in San Diego, here, we're still vulnerable. Many of you may not be aware that last week was our wonderful city council meeting.
Oh.
It was a phenomenal meeting. I say that very sarcastically. And it's not something that I listen to with any regularity. I think it's quite boring. I get very fidgety and bored when I'm we're in process talks. And I think I don't even know what the content of the meeting was. Do you know, Mitch? I don't even remember. I don't know if you heard.
It had nothing to do with what was subsequently.
Nothing, zero. It was like on trees. I think it was about trees, literally. I think it was about because the federal government, they're getting a few $1 million from federal government to plant more trees, and they were talking about trees. So interspersed with what was to be a benign conversation about trees were amazingly bigoted, racist, homophobic, and anti-Jewish commentary that came through. Hurtful racist language to the chair of the meeting, including and many derogatory anti-Jewish sentiments on public display. You can tune out, you can go on it, it's public commentary. And I sat with that for a moment because I watched our Jewish community respond. And we have a wonderful Jewish community that does really well at responding. And it was very, very important for them to do so. Where I went with it was to my multi-faith colleagues, and I said, I'd love for you to give this a listen and tell me your thoughts. Because this is what's operating in our area today. I just want you to be aware of what's going on, because I, like you, like me, probably didn't hear what was happening. So I want you to just be aware. And their response was profound. Like, this is horrific, disgusting, horrible. But we weren't talking in a vacuum. We were starting to engage the other. And my hope in that dialogue wasn't to scare them, but it was to see how our vulnerability doesn't sit in a vacuum. Our vulnerability, we have capacity with our vulnerability to grow and to be stronger. And where we are, and we all face it. We face it in our personal lives and in moments that we have and will have. None of us are immune to vulnerability. We may have different coping mechanisms. Some may be into mindfulness, meditation, yoga, Jewish life and learning. However boxing, I know people do boxing. My son does boxing, it's great. And it really works. It lets out, I go to the gym a lot. I love it. That's my release. And at the end of the day, it's about how do you utilize your vulnerability and how do you make it applicable to the ways in which you want to manifest your own destiny. That to me is what it's about. So the vulnerability that I mentioned has different layers, right? It has the personal, it has the voluntary, the involuntary. And I really, if you haven't given a listen, and I know a number of you have, really heed the 20-minute TED Talk that I called upon yesterday, because she's just phenomenal. She's someone that I attribute a lot of my pastoral success to her, because she's such a gift. And yeah.
60 million views of that 20-minute.
Just 60 million?
It's over 60 million views. That's
Yeah.
how good this is.
So Brene Brown is her name, Dr. Brene Brown, Brene Brown. And The Power of Vulnerability, that's a TED Talk. I received that from Nicole, my wife, years ago, and who's been in this work, huh?
That's what put her on the map.
Oh, you're here. That's what put her on the map. That's what you, but I'm saying that you turned me on to her.
But I'm just saying, she talks about how incredibly vulnerable it was for that video to go viral and completely change her life and put her on public
Yes.
display in a way that she never used.
Yes, that is, she did. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Yep.
I'm a little confused about three things. Actually, I'm confused about many things, but as far as vulnerability and sensitivity,
Okay.
are they similar?
Vulnerability and sensitivity. So everything I say is my experience, okay? So I'm not the therapist in the room, and there are some I see here. Vulnerability is the way in which the tool, I'm gonna call it a tool, in which we use to transcend the unknown. Sensitivity is the way in which we operate with the other. And there can be vulnerability in it, but there doesn't have to be. Being sensitive to someone's life experience is part of who you can be, but it doesn't mean that you're vulnerable in it. Like, so when I think about someone who, if I'm visiting them in the hospital, I'm sensitive to their position. I'm thinking about them. I'm in that space of wanting to be supportive of them. But I don't believe I'm operating from a place of vulnerability in that moment. I believe I'm operating in a place of trying to be a mensch, trying to be a good person, thinking about who they are and what their circumstances are. But for me, it's not driving my vulnerability. There may be some of us where sensitivity is a vulnerability, right? Where being sensitive can actually be a vulnerability because it's hard for some people to be sensitive. I know a lot of people who are, as we like to call Israelis sabras, right? Because they're prickly on the outside and mushy on the inside, right? And Tomer isn't that. He's everything. He's great. Right? But
He's already hard in and out.
he is in and out. My pastoral sessions will begin next week. But I want to. There are people who are very hard on the outside and don't present as sensitive. And for me, that's always something to be working on. Myself included, 100%. I am 95% sensitive in the congregation, and I would say probably 60% in my house. Right? That is a big difference. 60? Give me 60. Okay? I should have done metrics. No, forget metrics. But just say less. Right? So we know this is a constant conversation we're having, and I own up to it. I'm sitting in front of you, right? I could be vulnerable. I am being vulnerable right now. I'm saying, here I am. This is who I am. Like I am the same person I'm home as I am on the Bima, that's for sure. You catch me in Ralph's, you catch me in F45, you catch me on the Bima. I'm the same person. I am not going to be different. But there's a sensitivity. Sometimes I know that when I get home, I'm drained a lot. Like the spiritual, emotional draining is hard. And so that becomes more challenging for my family to navigate that, to be thoughtful and appreciative and kind. And that's a muscle. Being sensitive is also a muscle. It's not necessary, and it's not vulnerability. I don't feel vulnerable around being sensitive in my family, but that's a muscle that I have to continue working on. So I appreciate the question because it's something that I think all of us can learn from. It's not, none of us are perfect at it, and I don't believe in perfection. I don't think there's such a thing, but we can strive to do them. The mitzvot, the commandments, are not to achieve perfection. They're to strive to achieve community that is sacred, right? So when we're in the midst of holding mitzvot, it's about striving to do something, because what is the alternative? Chaos, Hamas, destruction. right? That is the alternative of not holding. So sensitivity is something we grow that muscle for. Great, Yom Kippur is a great time to start. It's a great time. I'm gonna get, Steve, you're after, go
I
ahead.
just want to say, on the subject of sensitivity,
Yes.
like there's a flip side to it. Those of us who are sensitive to a fault, right? Like that we feel everything, right?
Yeah.
And Brene Brown actually has some wonderful things to say about the relationship between that sort of sensitivity and vulnerability, because it can feel very vulnerable. If you're a very open person or you feel everything, it's easy to get overwhelmed. But and she has wonderful stuff about boundaries, right?
Yes.
But I just want to flag that, like for you, sensitivity is about something that you have to build. It's almost like flexibility versus strength. Like if you're very flexible, you can hurt yourself
Yes.
really easily.
Yeah.
And if you're very strong, you might not be very flexible and you have to work on. So anyway, I just want to put that out there
I love
because
that.
for some of us, sensitivity is not a choice, right?
Yeah. Thank you for lifting that up and for naming that. I think you're 100% right on. There are lots of people who are empaths and who operate in the world on different levels. I live with one of them. And in a beautiful way, right? In a beautiful way, can see the power and the beauty of the world and the gift of even in the people that or experiences that we may classify as evil, can see the better spirits of an individual, and that is hard, and for those of us, I don't live in that space, but those who do live in that space, I can imagine that it's involuntary in many ways, and so that's something to lift up as well. So I'm glad, thank you for adding that. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve, and I'm a Zionist.
Welcome.
Thank you. I love Israel, but I find that I don't love a lot of Israelis right now. I look at people like Ben Gvir, and I think maybe what I feel is hatred. It's a very strong feeling that something I love is being destroyed, and I don't know what to do with that feeling.
Thank you for naming it. So who is Ben Gvir? Let me explain. Let me just give a little context. So I mentioned it in the Israel sermon that, notice I didn't name it Israel sermon, right? It says nothing of Israel. It says get curious and lean in. I was very intentional about the title because I believe that the language in which I use for this can be applicable in many situations. It's not just about Israel, but I believe getting curious and leaning in is a very important topic. Someone who came to me last week after services something about ritual and said, I think somebody online had, it might be David. Hi, David. I think can you mute your line?
From the doctors on what is your medical number or your social, and I'll get your account pulled
up. Somebody came and asked me about something ritual that we do or don't do. And they came to me, clearly they came with an opinion, right? They came to me, and you can imagine I get approached like that. Once or twice a week. So about something that people were, like they don't want to say it, but they ask it as a commentary. And I get curious about it. I say, tell me more. What you clearly are thinking something. So I'm curious to know what you're thinking. It automatically diffuses, when I come from a place of curiosity, it diffuses the potential challenge that's about to ensue, right? When I come from a place of inquiry, I dive deeper into finding out more about the individual and finding out about their positions, and it may be we agree to disagree, that's okay, that's not a problem. But at least I'm coming from a place of honor and respect and saying, well, let me hear your voice. Let me hear what's going on. So I want to go back to what Steve is saying, because I believe there's a lot there. Who is Ben Gvir? Ben Gvir is, and I mentioned this, is an ultra-nationalist who is a kahanist. What is a kahanist? Meir Kahana was for many years the head of an ultra-right faction in Israel that basically wants to claim Judea and Samaria, which are notably the West Bank of the territories, as Israel proper. And he has sanctioned killings of Palestinians and others because they are not the rightful inheritors, and so therefore we can go in and kill them. And he has justified this through text, he has justified it through halacha, through Jewish law, or tried to. And for most Israeli society, that small faction has been shunned for many years, as seen as an aberration in Israeli mainstream life. Fast forward to a prime minister who is trying to get out of jail, trying to stay out of jail. We don't know anything about that. And trying to stay out of jail and working his way to building a coalition. Now, he could have tried, when he was elected, his party was rightfully elected. They were democratically elected. The Likud party, it's a parliamentary system, 120 seats, 32, I think, went to the Likud, 31, 32, anybody have the numbers? That was right, okay, 32 went to the Likud, rightfully elected, democratically elected by the population. Largest gathering of voters in, I believe, many, many, many years in Israel, and they were rightfully elected. Netanyahu is the head of the party. The head of the party has the right to, according to the declaration, to go to the president and to Bougie and to say, I'm ready to build a coalition. So he has 30 days to build a coalition. In 30 days, the center parties said, we don't want to deal with a criminal. We don't want our hands dealing with a criminal. So he went to the next best deal for him, which was the ultra-right. And the ultra-right has a lot of things that they are trying to get out of. They are trying to get out of military service. And that was on the table. That was on the actual agenda for the Knesset. And right now, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, do not have an opportunity, are not serving in the IDF, and they're absorbing a lot of the financial resources of the Israeli people, because Israeli people have a very high tax rate, and a lot of that goes to the IDF, and it goes to also welfare services. Well, many of the Haredim don't work. They study in yeshiva. And so they have to be supported by welfare. And so they get welfare, but they don't contribute on the other side to the nationalistic ideologies of the declaration and the government. So there are very small Haredi units in the IDF. There are a few here and there, ultra-Orthodox units, but very few and far. And so they are, right now, they have a lot of opportunity to gain this possibility that they could get out of service. Well, if you have a prime minister that's ready to concede whatever he has to in order to maintain power and in order to keep out of jail, and you have a right-wing government that wants what they want, you're gonna set that. It's a pretty good setup. So they have a majority, 64 seats out of 120. It's a pretty solid majority, better than our Senate, better than our House, right? Pretty solid, right? So they do everything in lockstep. It's very clear. And the first part of this is the reasonableness clause. And I'm getting to your question. It's a long answer to your question, but I felt people need to have some basic understanding. The reasonableness law, there are two sets of government. There's Knesset, which is the legislator, and the judicial. That's all they have in Israel. There is no constitution. Remember, I said it. I said in my sermon that I really believe that the foundations of the government were a bit flawed because there was no time to think about constitutionality. They were fighting for survival. And so the Constitution was kind of sidelined. And the idea that there would be this Orthodox, major right Orthodox majority, according to Ben-Gurion, was a fallacy. he said when he signed, well, I need your support, the Orthodox community. Okay, we'll give you your support, but you have to put us in charge of the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Okay, I figured it'll be a Chiloni, it'll be a secular state. They'll be gone in 10 years, and it'll be over. He was wrong.
Yeah.
And so, with that, with the amalgamation of the intensity around the moment, this government that where kahanas were considered abhorrent are now mainstream in Israeli society.
Sounds familiar.
And so I'm keeping all domestic politics outside this room. And for Israel I can talk about, I have the right to talk about it. So for me, this is not about the politics of Israel. This is about the soul of Israel. Like, is it going to be a democratic Jewish majority? Is it going to be a religious authoritarian autocracy? I don't want the latter. I don't think any of us want the latter. One thing that I took out of my sermon, because it was already getting lengthy, and I had so much more to say, trust me, so I'll share that here. But there was one thing that I took out, that was, there are a number of people, even in this room, who are Jews by choice. And you have made our community so rich and so beautiful in so many ways, and you take your Judaism extremely seriously, your identity. And today, if you go to Israel and you are converted in a non-Orthodox congregation, you have every right to make Aliyah. We have just had someone make Aliyah in January who was part of our community for a few years. She became a convert here. She made Aliyah a year later. She is a citizen of Israel, learning and growing and doing all the things that she's doing. If the reasonableness clause gets amended and the Knesset with an ultra-right majority gets their way, the question of will those Jews by choice who were converted in non-Orthodox communities be accepted as Jews in Israel and be allowed to make Aliyah? That is on the docket. That is not a small thing. We don't talk about that so often, but that for us is everything. In this congregation, we have a conversion population of nearly 18 to 22 a year. That's a large number. That's why we need the mikvah. The mikvah is more on that in November. So imagine 18 to 22 just from our congregation. Now multiply that with all the other San Diego congregations and all the other congregations in the United States and all the non-Orthodox congregations around the world. And you have tens of thousands of people. Not all of them are going to make Aliyah, but they want the opportunity to possibly do that. And now that will be compromised. It also could be compromised in some Orthodox congregations. Liberal Orthodox congregations that are not sanctioned by the Rabanut in Israel are not at play either. So I want to be very clear. It's not just non-Orthodox. It's Orthodox that are not sanctioned by the Ministry of Rabbinic Affairs, the Rabanut in Israel. So that I just wanted to say that. Back to Steve's question, how to feel. I can't tell you how to feel, but I can tell you, I tend to lean on what's going right and what's going wrong. And in terms of hate, I find hate, I feel hate takes up too much time and space in my life. I feel that anger takes up too much time. And when I focus on the anger, when I focus on the hate, it's not going to propel me forward. So instead, I can dismiss those individuals by not being people that I will ever ally with, and rather focus my energies on what I can do, and where I have the pulpit, and where I have the freedom and the capacity to bring more like-minded people into the fold. And it's not perfect, and it doesn't alleviate the disdain. I have disdain, utter disdain for Kahanis, like disdain for Ben Gavir, who outrightly mocks and is racist and is homophobic and is all the things that the Israel that I love is not. So I don't pay him any mind. It's not worth my time or my energy. And I focus on what I can do and not what I can't do. So that's just some food for thought. There you go, go ahead. Oh, I gotta come around to Jason, go ahead. Who are you?
I'm Jan.
Hi, Jen.
There's a whole row of us within this row who were with you in Israel last November, when it was actually on election day that we were there.
Yes.
And I don't know if any of us here today went with you to, on the secondary trip to Abu Dhabi and where, but how does that jive with what's going on there now? The fact that Israel is opening up to, and
Yeah.
people are going, and I remember your joy at being able to do that.
Yeah, we went, half of the group stayed on with me and we went to United Arab Emirates. Flying over Saudi airspace, landing in an El Al plane in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai.
Wow.
Dubai is like Las Vegas on steroids, so that's what you can see it once and you'll never have to go again. But it's weirdly incredible. Weird, right? I don't even know what to say. This is so outrageous. That said, I think there's something really important that's going on right now. The Abraham Accords were critical. They were really critical. And what's happening now with the potential of normalization with Saudi Arabia is could be transformational. There's a lot of sticky points though in order to get there. This is not a fait accompli as Netanyahu tried to sell to 10% of the participation of the United Nations General Assembly that decided to stay and hear his speech. 10%, literally. The speech was actually quite good. Unfortunately, no one wants to hear him because you don't know what he's selling, what he's not anymore. But he's holding up maps and he's showing and it all looks good, right? But it's challenging because we don't know what the normalization will look like in terms of the Palestinian issue, right? What that's going to look like with self-determination, how that's going to be at play, because Saudi leadership have always been very vocal about normalizing relationships with the Palestinian people. If there's any Middle Eastern Arab country that could actually bring a sort of normalization, I'm not going to say peace because that's not on the table today. I would be lying if I said it was. But if there's any, it could be the Saudi deal. It could be that there has to be some sort of normalization and that they're going to force the hand of the Palestinian leadership in order to make it happen. I don't know. I'm not a politician. We got a district director back there who is Blazer. I don't know if he has anything to say, but I would say, just for me, I think it's a very good thing. So there are internal and external struggles. Internally, Israel is having a really tough time internally because it's fighting for its soul and figuring out what that's going to look like. Externally, lots of great things are going on. It doesn't seem that the Arab world is at all bothered by what's happening. It doesn't seem, I'm sure it is a little rattled, but it doesn't seem so rattled because it's about economic prosperity. And Israel does really good. The shekel is down now a little bit, but it'll go back up. And Israel is resilient. Israel leans into its vulnerability and says, these are the areas we're vulnerable, we're gonna make ourselves stronger and figure it out. We have swamp, we have desert, we're gonna make it bloom. We have no water, we're going to desalinate and we're gonna make water. We have intellectual capacity, we're gonna make biotech the operating element of how we move forward in tech in the world. We're going to be the leaders. All of these things happen, right? So that's how I believe, and I believe the world sees that, and leaders see that, and they lean into that. Go ahead, Jason.
So I guess I'm like Irv, where I look at the Israel subject and the vulnerability subject together. Don't need any political advice, but could definitely use life advice. So I feel like when one is vulnerable, you essentially have two options. You can go into a defensive posture so you don't get broken, or you can acknowledge the challenges and view it as an opportunity to fix the challenges. In Israel's case, like you just brought up, they've acknowledged many vulnerabilities and taken advantage of that to fix them. But now it appears that we have more of a defensive posture on whatever side of the political scale you might rate yourself. So how do you rebalance that of people going into a defensive posture so they don't get broken, and instead looking at this as an opportunity in which we can come together and try to fix it?
So were you asking about Israel or personal?
I would say as a Jewish people. So as a Jewish people, because I consider Israel vulnerable, I consider the Jewish people to be in a vulnerable state right now. As a Jewish people, how can we take this as an opportunity rather than being in such a defensive posture?
So I would counter by saying we've always been vulnerable, that's never lessened. I actually think we're in the strongest position we've ever been as a Jewish people in the history of Jewish civilization. I don't think there's been a stronger time when, by and large, the majority of Jews who are living in this world live under free democratic countries. Ever. Right? Would you agree? Okay, good. If I got your agreement, I'm good. So I would say that. So I would say starting from there is really important to understand that we are not as vulnerable as sometimes we see. Our ancestral DNA helps us understand that. Our connections to the Shoah and the Holocaust make that very real, but that's also lessening because the generational divide, and that we're losing Shoah survivors every day, and that there are not many left. And so what happens is when we lose that continuity, that's where our vulnerability can be. So where do we grab onto the vulnerability? Where do we access it? Is the question. We can either shut everything out and say we don't want to deal with it, it's just not for us, or we can lean into what's possible. And I'm about leaning into what is possible. I don't believe that we can lean into things that are not possible. Speaking with a Kahanis, not possible. Speaking with a racist, here, I've seen moderate success at times, but I don't believe it's fully possible. I'm not talking to the bigots or the racists, because that's not where my energies are best spent. My vulnerability is seeing how collectively we are vulnerable, but how individually we can do more. And we all have that power. We all do. And sometimes our life situation or circumstance keeps us limited and curled in to our own, to lean into our own cocoon, because it's more comfortable there, right? It's more comfortable if I could just be here. If I'm out here, especially if you're an introvert, or if you're someone who doesn't, an extroverts, you can imagine I'm an extrovert. So I get my energy from being around people. And an introvert doesn't mean you don't want to be in front of people. There are many rabbis that are introverts. Many. Great on the pulpit, great sermons, great dress show, davening, all that good stuff. You speak to them one-on-one, nothing, right? And it's just because they're uncomfortable. So regardless of who we are, however we label ourselves, or wherever we are on the Myers-Briggs layer of life, that we all have ability to look outward. We all do. And I believe that every strand of every being of Jewish life and identity have the ability to look outward. There's no question. So I would say, be aware of your cocooning, if you are the one that's cocooning, and really ask yourself, do I need to be here? What would happen if? You don't know what the answer is if you haven't done it before. And even if you've been burned once or twice, does that mean there's going to happen a third time? Not necessarily. There are no guarantees in life. I don't believe that. So I believe that even if you've been burned once or twice or 3 times or 5 times, that's why I believe Israel is as strong as it is, because it's failed many times to do many different things, and then all of a sudden picks itself up again. So we did this wrong. Okay, we're going to try again. We did this wrong. We're going to try again. We're going to figure it out. This is what's going on there right now, and I think this is what goes on with us. And I see it pastorally, I see it individually. People are struggling. They're struggling because we're in a world that's swirling all the time, and sometimes we need to shut it off. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you're cocooning. It's a very different kind of cocoon, right? That's self-preservation. Like, how often are we taking a moment for breathing? How often are we taking a moment for, even if it's just that that moment, people ask me every day, well, how do you go from appointment to appointment? And I said, well, I don't. I leave a 10-minute window, and once a day, not always once a day, but I usually do a 2-minute meditation. That's because that helps ground me. It's my respite. Because otherwise, if I get to like this, then my other vulnerable elements are going to start uncovering, and that's okay for maybe what I want to for what I need to do in the long term, but in the short term, I need to step up, right? So I need to do so. That's just a thought. I know we had. Go ahead, yeah, and then Tomer, go ahead.
So what role does education have in helping to overcome the disparity between the younger generations who may not be aware of the historical significance of a lot of different things? The war in '73, for instance. I remember being in Civic Theater when it was announced from the Bima. I mean, because there are people who just don't know whatever went on, and there are people who just don't know what's going on today that might have known what was happening 40 years ago.
Yeah. Education is everything. I mean, and where there are states that are denying opportunities for education as we speak. And education becomes, first of all, education is so valued in Jewish life, right? We know that. And that is one of the pinnacle things that is critical to how we operate. Everything is about learning, right? It's not always about testing or giving, but it's about learning. And when we learn in our tradition, we learn in chavruta. Chaver means friend, chavruta is one to the other. You never learn alone. You may take a test alone, you may operate alone, but you never operate alone. You never are separated from your community. You're always together. You always should be learning in chavruta. So creating more opportunities for engagement and learning is critical. The challenge is this. This gets in the way for many people, meaning they'd rather learn on their feeds than actually sit and learn and be in dialogue. And so that becomes compromising. And we're in a different generation. And so all of us are guilty. 90% of us in this room are addicted, myself included. And we have to navigate how to make the time. You're choosing to be here on Yom Kippur afternoon, being part of a discussion, sharing thoughts and words. We're not in our phones. We're here. We're sitting. We're listening to each other. That's beautiful. But education comes through dialogue, and we have to build on that. And so we haven't. I don't have an answer for you, other than I know it's important. That helps. Go ahead, tell me how to say it.
Just a comment to give a context. I'm a third generation, so my grandparents came from wherever. And now we are seeing a transition between the third and the fourth generation. I'm 36, and it's kind of a growth that reconstruct the state. And in the US, you had the Civil War in that time, the third, fourth generation. And it's very common, like worldwide, this thing of that phenomenon. So I'm kind of hopeful to us to be able to finally get a constitution, for example, and solve the political structure that is not working for many years, and the religious guys that don't work and serve the army, and all that thing that's been accumulating for a lot of time. Is I'm quite optimistic because I see friends of mine, secular, go to protest every week and with their parents and grandparents. So it's really something that I think will be good in the future.
That's beautiful. So that's another thing that's good in Israel, right? That's binding Israel, that we're starting to see generations supporting each other, right? And that hasn't really happened before. And in our society, it's missing. In American society, it's missing. But it's there. We're starting to see its evolution and growth. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Tali. Say your name.
I'm Tali. So I think one of the things that worries me, I'm a diaspora Jew. I was born and raised in the States. I lived in Israel for 6 years. I'm now living back in the States. And I work in an organization called Club Z, where the Z stands for Zionism, and I work with teenagers. And I see how American Jewish teenagers, those that identify as Zionist have become a minority within the diaspora American Jewish community. And one of the things that I see in my work, and this is what worries me, is I'm very critical of Israel. What I believe about Israel's politics is mine and my own. But to me, Zionism is the belief that Jews have the right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland. And I see every day in the news, on social media, the term Zionism and being identified as a Zionist distorted to mean whatever people are associating what's happening in Israel with the politics today. And what scares me is, as you stated, every single day we have survivors of the Holocaust that are dying. Their stories, their firsthand stories will not be told. And as the grandchild of Holocaust survivors, like, this is something that is so real to my desire to have a Jewish state. And I worry about this sense of, for lack of a better term, I don't like this term, but I can't think of another one, like infighting within the Jewish community about basically saying, like, either Israel is what we want it to be in its practice, and forgetting that it's also an ideology behind what Israel means to so many of us. And I worry about the infighting within the Jewish community and how that, specifically within the diaspora community, like, how does Israel move forward when you have an American Jewish population that is so polarized when it comes to Zionism in Israel?
It's a great question, and that's another whole 6-month session that we'll do. But just on one foot, several things. One of the realities is that a lot of teens where we're hearing this, as you know, as you're dealing with them, operate, first of all, their frontal cortex hasn't been fully developed. So the idea of black and white thinking without nuance is very much on par for where they are developmentally. And so that's just something to recognize. And when you see a hashtag that says Free Palestine, you and I may know what that means, right? That means from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means no more Israel. Well, if I think about, well, I'm a pretty good person and I'm a pretty good teenager and I like people and I want people to be free and safe, why wouldn't I support the Palestinian people? I don't know much about them, but they sound like good people, so I'm going to support them. I don't know anything else. And so they put a hashtag on it. And it grows, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows without nuance, without history, without education. And then they get to college campus. And then the people who are anti-Israel are far stronger and far more sophisticated than we are. And we have failed our children in this generation for dismissing their lack or their apathy around Israel because we didn't get curious. We said, you'll grow into it, you'll love it like we do, it's not a big deal, you know. And I may have said that even 6 or 7 years ago. I would have said, those teens, I'll get you in 1 second. Those teens are gonna grow into it, they're gonna love it, we're gonna take them to Israel, they're gonna be so excited, it's gonna be great. And we do a lot of great work with our teens and love of Israel. So I'm not gonna say it doesn't have its beauty. And there are some teens, in fact, parents of teens in this room whose children are living with Palestinians right now and grew up here and trying to understand where Zionism fits in, if it does at all, to their own reality. And so, and I'm saying, I'm not talking about Beth Israel specifically, but as a generation, I think we did a disservice. We did a disservice by taking it for granted that our children would have a love of Israel like I grew up with. I grew up with, my parents are boomers. I grew up with that understanding of Israel. My grandfather, Leva Shalom, fought in World Wars I and II as an American Jew. Oldest man on the USS aircraft carrier, Franklin. he fought because he believed he was going to fight the Nazis, right? That was his hope. While he was chased out of Tsarist Russia, he thought when he landed here, he would get an opportunity to fight back. And so I took that passion and his survival and both of my grandparents' stories and made it my own. And our children, by and large, don't have those stories. They have parents and generation above them telling them to love Israel, but we're not educating them on the complexities. And it's time we do. So we need to start. We've started here. It's highly imperfect. And we're going to continue the deep dive. But to say it's all or nothing, to say if I'm going to share my love of Zionism, which I have, I said it, Zionism means to me an acknowledgement that nearly the entire global Jewish community supports the right to and need for Jewish national self-determination in part of the ancestral homeland. I say part because we were given part in 1947, 1948, we were given part. And I believe we've expanded since then, and I believe that what exists today for a lot of reasons. But barring war, this is where we are, and this is the threshold which we understand society and where we live today. And so if we're going to put ourselves out there and be vulnerable around this discussion, because this is an easy discussion to have with my kids or to have with the many who I come into contact with every single week that I teach. We have to have the discussions because we have to lean into the vulnerability and the possibility that they may not love Israel the same way I do. And I have to be accepting of that, because if I don't, I'm going to chase them away anyway. So why wouldn't I engage them in the discussion? Why wouldn't I understand and invite them and say you were seen and heard? Because they are seen and heard. I hear you. But I'm not going to take your complacency and apathy as the end all. We're going to talk. I'm going to invite you to coffee. You're going to get a free meal. And I'm going to share with you why I love, and I want to hear why you question or why you wrestle. Because I have more to gain with the questioning than I ever do with denial or pushing away. Never going to get anywhere. That's my roundabout answer to a non-answer, right? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. We are closing in on the last 5 minutes. I'm going to end at 2:20, so you can get 10 minutes for a little break before we begin contemporary confessions. So go ahead.
I'm Richard, and education you spoke of and what you just spoke of, I want to tie two things together, which is it's so complicated history if we don't teach people how to critically think. And I say that because we have this thing called social studies, and people think it's history. It's not. It's about examining the situation. If you ask someone, what is the Sholach, what's the Holocaust, they'll tell you a history, but you have to understand what happened before that. How did we get othered? How did the people that were so loved and were the shop owners, the next had glasnost at the night of the broken windows? Because history has to explain when you do something horrible, which is you other people. And the other part of this, which I want to say is, I don't mean to disagree with you, but you said people study together, but they must study alone. They must not just walk into a room and say what that person said and repeat it. You have to go to the source, read the document, appreciate when you understand something. So example, when we do Torah, it's not okay just to repeat someone else's drash. You must understand what the text says. So that's what I offer, that students today have to be equipped not just with a bunch of facts, but how to really examine.
So let me clarify the Chavruta model. The Chavruta model is taking text, history, whatever it is, and studying it together and debating and wrestling and encouraging each other to hear one another, not to take what one said as fact or truth, but to look at what's in front of you and to wrestle with it. So that's really that's what I agree with. I'm agreeing with you. I agree that I believe that's what we're talking about. We're on the same page here because it is critical, and we have a model for it. We do. And when we talk about education, and just to go back to your question about education, that's what we need to go back to. We don't with our children. And if we do, we don't make it accessible in the ways that we should. We expect the teaching to be frontal, and this is what it is, and this is what you should know. That doesn't exist anymore. We are whole people with so much nuance. And the way that it used to work, as Rabbi Gimbel beautifully said today about tradition, doesn't always work. It needs to be re-examined. We can hold on to pieces of our tradition, but if we're not in discussion about it, what are we doing with it? So that's really important. I saw some hand. We'll go last three, and then I'll stay for a few minutes if you want to come up to me and talk. Go ahead.
When we're talking a lot about talking about things,
Yeah.
I work with small children, and there's also the listening piece, is teaching, reteaching, especially after COVID, what is it like to be able to listen to somebody else's point of view? And then whether you're using a story or whatever, when we talk back to vulnerability, well, how does that make you feel? So really getting involved with a situation that someone may not relate to, but they can relate to the emotional piece and bring that forward. And that's the beginning of a conversation about interacting and knowledge.
It's
So,
beautiful.
yeah.
I don't need to add anything to that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Go ahead. And then I want to do one close. I just want to say one thing in closing. Go ahead.
What I'm hearing from you and what disturbs me is we moved from East Lansing, Michigan. My kids were very connected with the synagogue, but when they went off to college, poof. Our niece and nephew live up Menlo Park, and ultimately their son and daughter went to a Hebrew high school. And I vividly remember when our great nephew was in Israel with the high school trip, and he was like, film, and he told his parents he was going to make Aliyah. And everything was very positive towards Israel. And then he went to Northeastern Boston, and his first girlfriend was Muslim. And you're saying some of the same things that you're seeing, and I see more positivity here in this congregation, which is something we love. But is it necessarily helping solve the situation, or?
I understand what you're saying. So that is a nuanced question, and the response is nuanced because I can only tell you anecdotally where I see many of our children's passions lie. I can tell you that in our religious school this year, the majority of our faculty, first of all, we have the youngest faculty we've ever had in the history of the congregation. Secondly, 2/3 of the faculty grew up with Congregation Beth Israel. Awesome. So are we doing something? Is there something in the water here? And I think there's something to be valued about that. But every one of those students knows that this is a place they can feel safe to ask the questions and get honest, authentic responses, or have an idea or wherewithal to where to go with it, right? And so instead of it, for me, I've watched the hardliners. Listen, I am an ardent Zionist, right? I watched how I used to deny the voices of those who used to push against Israel. And while I still don't relate to those voices in my everyday, I understand it very differently than I did even a few years ago. And I'm not willing to give up that questioning. I'm not willing to give up the wrestling. So I want to conclude. So a couple of things. One, I hope this was good food for thought. Don't give up the wrestling. If you or your children or your children's children or your friends' children or you are having questions, the fact that you're here, the fact that you're listening, the fact that you're contributing, that's a piece of what this is about. It's about not giving up. And it's about us being in this space and understanding that we have a voice. The other thing is that I'll say is that we operate on other days other than Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. It's amazing.
What day? When's that?
What day? I'm glad you asked. 6:15 every Friday night we have a Torah study every week on Saturday and Minyan at 10:30 on Shabbat morning. We have countless, endless pieces. And listen, prayer may not be for everybody, and so maybe you're once a year in the congregation because that's all you can handle for a prayerful moment. I get that. I'm not being realistic to who we have and who our congregation is. That's nothing I'm asking you. I'm inviting you in these moments to really use it as a jumping off point to see where your identity fits. And it can be in so many ways, in shapes, not just the prayerful moments, although I love Jews in the pews. I love to have people in the hall, in the congregation. We don't have pews, thank God. I love that you're active, and I love that you're here and engaged. And we have an incredibly engaged community, and we keep on growing, and we want to see more because we believe you have a voice. There's a lot to offer. A lot of things are led by our lay leaders and not just staff. We have amazing programs that are led by our staff, but a lot of the learning, in fact, if you look at some of our adult learning, led by congregants. And it's you, and you may have a specialty, a skill that we can avail ourselves of. So what I'm saying is, don't be shy. Don't just come around once a year. Pop in. You want to meet with me? You want to connect? You want a coffee? Sign up. All right. So great opportunity. No coffee today. 6:15. Is anybody going to get my coffee? Come on, and if you haven't checked out, if you have not checked out, Contemporary Confessions, I highly urge you to. It is phenomenal.